Joe Biden does not have principles. He does not have firmly held values. And I think we've seen that repeatedly throughout 50 years of failure. I mean, the guy pretended to be a civil rights leader while at the same time eulogizing Klansmen and voting against integration, as Kamala Harris reminded us of. He's basically fully responsible for a crime bill that decimated minority communities after he pushed it through the Senate by calling young black men predators on our streets, only to say, hey, sorry about that. I might have got that wrong when he decided to take his grift to the White House in 2020. And now we see him turning his back on the only true ally in the entire Middle East, the only true democracy for thousands and thousands of miles, and the victim of the most gruesome terror attack in modern history. All because he wants to placate and please the anti-Semitic, terror-loving crazies that have taken over the Democratic Party. This is a man with zero principles.
I want to ask you about something happening as we sit here and speak, and that, of course, is Israel is striking Rafa. I know that you have paused, Mr. President, shipments of 2,000-pound U.S. bombs to Israel due to concern that they could be used in any offensive on Rafa. Have those bombs, those powerful 2,000-pound bombs, been used to kill civilians in Gaza?
Civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs and other ways in which they go after population centers. And I made it clear that if they go into Rafa, they haven't gone into Rafa yet. If they go into Rafa, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafa, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah, artillery shells.
So, just to understand what they're doing right now in Rafa, is that not going into Rafa as you define it yet?
They haven't gone into the population centers. What they did is right on the border, and it's causing problems with right now in terms of with Egypt, which I've worked very hard to make sure we have a relationship and help. But I've made it clear to Bibi and the War Cabinet.
Obviously, the first thing that's going to jump at you is the fact that this guy has no clue what he's even talking about. He's just doing and saying whatever his handlers have told him that he needs to do and say, all based on polling or radical agenda, whatever they're basing it on. And what he essentially said was, we're going to help Israel stop rockets. We'll let them do purely defensive acts, but we won't allow them to finish the job. We won't allow them to actually finish the war. And just think about that. 7 months into this war, and Joe Biden does not want Israel to finish it, doesn't want them to root out and neutralize every single last terrorist, which is their right. And all because some gender studies majors and outside agitators are taking over college campuses, taking over bridges, and he's worried that they're not going to vote for him. And I'm sorry, man, but if this man had values, if he had principles, he would have absolutely nothing but words of support for Israel or any other nation defending themselves.
Safe harbor against anyone. And
my commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad.
President Biden reiterating his ironclad support for Israel and its goal to eradicate Hamas, but then he delayed a key shipment of weapons to Israel as the IDF takes control of the Rafah crossing, the last Hamas stronghold in Gaza. Let's bring in retired general and Fox News senior strategic analyst, General Jack Keane. What can you tell us and your thoughts about the delay of these weapons?
Well, certainly it's a huge contradiction when the administration is trying to say publicly that they're locked into supporting Israel with everything they need. And there's two issues here. One is the obvious one. They're holding back bombs, mortar ammunition, and tank ammunition. We can make the presumption that Israel needs that. They wouldn't be asking for it. And the administration won't discuss what is being held back and why, so we're left to speculate. It seems pretty obvious they're trying to use it as leverage with the Israelis. Remember, the president has publicly disagreed with how Israel is conducting its operation in Rafah to eventually clear it. They would rather them not conduct the operation at all. And when you look back on it, and he uses the term safe harbor in his discussion over the Holocaust, that you cannot provide that kind of safe harbor to people who are going to commit genocide. Well, if we don't clear Rafa, if we do as the administration would like us to do nothing, doesn't that provide safe harbor right there in Rafa for the Hamas, who have already committed genocide and whose intent is to kill as many Jews as they possibly can? So huge contradiction here with what public rhetoric and also what the administration is actually doing.
That's exactly what the world wants. They want safe harbor for Hamas. They have been coerced and trained and tricked into believing that Hamas is the good guys. They're some sort of brave freedom fighters fighting an apartheid regime or whatever the lunatic buzzwords are of the day. They don't want Israel to go into the last pocket of terrorists and eliminate them. You know, they want them to survive for some reason. And I'm not fully entirely sure why or what excuse they've convinced themselves with. I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but my guess is that they don't have a true understanding of what is actually going on here. And they're just all being led around by insane terrorist propaganda peddling monsters like Rashida Tlaib.
Safe harbor against anyone. And my commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad.
President Biden reiterating his ironclad support for Israel and its goal to eradicate Hamas, but then he delayed a key shipment of weapons to Israel as the IDF takes control of the Rafa crossing, the last Hamas stronghold in Gaza. Let's bring in retired general and Fox News senior strategic analyst, General Jack Keane. What can you tell us and your thoughts about the delay of these weapons?
Well, certainly it's a huge contradiction when the administration is trying to say publicly that they're locked into supporting Israel with everything they need. And there's two issues here. One is the obvious one. They're holding back bombs, mortar ammunition, and tank ammunition. We can make the presumption that Israel needs that. They wouldn't be asking for it. And the administration won't discuss what is being held back and why, so we're left to speculate. It seems pretty obvious they're trying to use it as leverage with the Israelis. Remember, the president has publicly disagreed with how Israel is conducting its operation in Rafah to eventually clear it. They would rather them not conduct the operation at all. And when you look back on it, and he uses the term safe harbor in his discussion over the Holocaust, that you cannot provide that kind of safe harbor to people who are going to commit genocide. Well, if we don't clear Rafa, if we do as the administration would like us to do nothing, doesn't that provide safe harbor right there in Rafa for the Hamas, who have already committed genocide and whose intent is to kill as many Jews as they possibly can? So huge contradiction here with what public rhetoric and also what the administration is actually doing.
Always a very, very sharp guy. I always like seeing this guy on TV. And I pray that we have a lot of guys just like General Jack Keane left in our army. My fear is that we don't, but I hope we do, man. But here's where we're at. This is the most careful ground invasion and most careful urban warfare in probably all of human history against an enemy that actually requires civilian casualties, requires it for propaganda, for leverage, for anything they can even pretend is a success, whatever they think a success is. And that's what it's been like for decades in this region. You know, Hamas or Hezbollah, they start some sort of conflict. Israel responds. Civilians are lost in the process because they hide their weapons. They hide their fighters in the civilian population. And then the world takes terrorist propaganda and just spins it up until spoiled little terror-supporting Western brats are taking over college campuses and screaming about genocide. And all that brings Israel to heel, and then it's just rinse and repeat, over and over and over. Every single time is worse than the last time. But this time Israel is going to finish it. And if they have to do it without Joey, I think they probably actually prefer that.
Tonight, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defiant, saying we will stand alone after President Biden's threat to withhold U.S. weapons if there's a full-scale invasion of Rafah. And these tense talks over a ceasefire halted amid fury over Rafah, with so many hostages still being held by Hamas. Mary Bruce at the White House tonight.
Tonight, as President Biden threatens to further withhold U.S. weapons from Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu defiant. If we have to stand alone, we will stand alone, he said today, firing back after Biden, in his most direct warning yet, said the U.S. would not provide Israel with weapons to attack Rafah.
Obviously, I mean, there's a lot of Western mistakes here. The same people who have depleted our own weapons stockpiles, spent every dime we can print or borrow, and pounded the drum of war to protect Ukraine, a country that fully, they deserve to defend themselves, but they are not an American ally. They are not a NATO ally. And now those same people are turning their back on the only true democracy in the Middle East, proving once again, man, that Bob Gates was 100% right when he said that Joe Biden has been wrong on every single foreign policy decision of his entire career. And if you need it put more simply than anything you've seen so far, I think Tom Cotton put it pretty perfectly.
It's now plain what we suspected all along. Joe Biden's de facto position is for a Hamas victory over Israel. Israel's goal is simple: rescue the hostages, including American hostages, and destroy Hamas to get justice for the worst atrocity against Jews since World War II and to prevent the next atrocity. Hamas's goal is also simple: survive. Hamas's leaders and its last 4 battalions are holed up in Rafah, so Israel has to defeat Hamas in Rafah to win. Hamas wins if it survives in Rafah. And Joe Biden has threatened to withhold weapons from Israel for fighting in Rafah. Therefore, Joe Biden objectively favors a Hamas victory over Israel. It's just that simple. And the president is only emboldening Hamas. Why would Hamas release hostages when Joe Biden will give Hamas exactly what it wants: survival without releasing hostages? He's also emboldening Iran. Here's what Joe Biden has done since October 7th. Sanctions for Israelis and an arms embargo on Israel. Sanctions relief and the end of an arms embargo on Iran. Now, some people say Joe Biden is doing this for his reelection, which would be bad enough. It would also, I have to add, be grounds for impeachment under the Democrats' Trump-Ukraine standard, withholding foreign aid to help one's reelection. Only with Joe Biden, it's true.
It really is that simple, man. Joe Biden favors a Hamas victory. It is that freaking simple. They have no incentive to release hostages. They have no incentive for a ceasefire. They have no incentive to negotiate the end of the war because they're just safe. They're safe because Joe Biden is protecting them. Hamas is being protected at this moment by Joe Biden. Iran is emboldened, Hamas is protected, Israel is punished, and that's exactly what this is. This is Biden's Ukraine phone call. Only this time people are actually dying, and no one really seems to care, unfortunately. But that's just my take, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you haven't already, be a part of our growth. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Most importantly, share the channel. I'll see you in the next one.